Jackie Kennedy desegregated the White House quietly. Federal troops, southern streets, a 6-year-old black child walking into school through screaming crowds. Then, the White House at night. In the early 1960s, in the American South, federal troops escorted black children to school, not to protect them from danger outside, to protect them from other Americans. In those same years, inside the White House, a black child sat in class beside the daughter of the President of the United States. Same country, same years. The woman behind that second image never gave a speech. She never held office. She never passed a law. She planned dinners. She wrote guest lists. She decided who sat next to whom. And with those things, she projected an image of America the country itself was not yet ready to become. This is the story of how a First Lady turned a dinner table into a political weapon. Let's go off script. History remembers Jacqueline Kennedy for pink suits, White House tours, and composure in Dallas. Underneath the glamour was something the cameras never fully named: a strategy. The question is whether it came from conviction or calculation. The honest answer is uncomfortable. It was both. In 1960, John F. Kennedy ran for president, and he had a problem he had barely thought about: Black America. For most of his career, civil rights had not been his cause. He was a Cold War politician. Berlin, Moscow, missiles. The South was somebody else's problem. Then he started counting. In a razor-close election, black voters in northern cities could decide everything. Suddenly, the senator, who had never prioritized civil rights, had a slogan aimed directly at black voters: Kennedy cares, Kennedy acts. In October 1960, Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested in Atlanta. Kennedy called King's wife. His brother called the judge. King was released. It was a small gesture. It was also perfectly timed. Kennedy didn't discover the cause. He discovered the arithmetic. He won by a sliver, and he knew who had helped put him there. There was someone else in that campaign who reached those voters far more naturally than he did: his wife. Comfortable where his advisors were stiff, speaking French to Creole communities, relaxed with people the campaign often treated cautiously. She already had formed as a bride in 1953. She had chosen a black designer for her wedding gown over the objections of her racist father-in-law. But this is another story. Once the Kennedys entered the White House, the couple divided the work, and only one of them actually moved. President Kennedy handled civil rights the same way he handled most dangerous political problems. He waited. The Cold War dominated his attention, and the Democratic Party still depended on segregationists, Southern senators he could not afford to alienate. So his strategy was delay. Move carefully. Avoid rupture. Let governors handle it. His wife chose a different approach, but she never challenged him publicly. She never gave speeches. She never became an activist. She used culture. The White House filled with writers, artists, musicians, philosophers, and diplomats. And Jackie made sure the guest lists looked unlike anything previous administrations had allowed. Under Harry S. Truman and Dwight D. Eisenhower, black guests at major White House events had been rare enough to be almost invisible. When I met the opera singer Grace Bumbry, she still remembered her disbelief. A young black artist invited to perform at the White House at a time when that almost never happened. Jackie built dinners where black judges, professors, and artists sat beside white guests as equals inside a building that had almost never staged such a thing before. Her husband would not change the law, so she changed the guest list. She planned every detail: menus, seating charts, placement, photographs. At the famous 1962 White House dinner for Nobel Prize winners, she invited the writer James Baldwin. Of roughly 175 guests, that night only 3 were black. And Baldwin was not hidden at the edge of the room. No, Jackie seated him beside Pierre Salinger, one of the president's closest advisors. Because Jackie Kennedy understood something many of her husband's advisors were still slow to grasp. The entire world was watching the United States, and much of that world was horrified by what he saw. This is the part the glamour tends to hide. The integrated White House was not only a moral gesture. In 1962, it was also a weapon. The United States was fighting the Soviet Union for influence across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And America had a problem it could not hide. It treated millions of its own citizens as second class. Every photograph of police dogs attacking black protesters traveled across the planet. Every image of children entering schools under armed protection reached newspapers in Africa, Asia, and Moscow. The Soviets did not need to invent American racism. The cameras already had. So an integrated White House became counter-propaganda, a carefully photographed image of cultured, democratic inclusion. And this is where the story refuses simplicity. Was Jackie Kennedy sincere? Yes. Was the integrated White House also useful Cold War theater? Also yes. Both things were true at once. That is what made it powerful. Because beyond the dinners, the real country was bleeding. In New Orleans, a 6-year-old girl named Ruby Bridges walked through screaming mobs to enter a school white parents refused to share with her. In Mississippi, a student named Dory Ladner was jailed for sitting at a whites-only counter. When I spoke with her, she described the moment activists realized they were no longer protesting safely. People could die now. And on the top floor of the White House, the president's daughter, Jacqueline Kennedy, shared a classroom with a black child named Avery Hatcher, the son of a Kennedy aide. Same country, same years. The White House showed America what it could become. The South showed America what it still was.
Keep on walking, keep on talking, walking up to freedom land.
But photographs cannot pass laws, and by 1963, the country was running out of time. Yes, by 1963, the civil rights movement refused to slow down. The marches spread. The violence spread with them. And the images became impossible to ignore, not only in America, but around the world. Martin Luther King pressed harder. The pressure kept building until President Kennedy had nowhere left to stand. On June 11th, 1963, Kennedy addressed the nation on television.
We have a right to expect that the Negro community will be responsible, will uphold the law, but they have a right to expect that the law will be fair, that the Constitution will be colorblind, as Justice Harlan said at the turn of the century.
For the first time, he called civil rights what it actually was, a moral issue, as old as the scriptures and as clear as the Constitution. It was a brave speech, but it did not lead the country to that moment. The country dragged him there. Weeks later came the March on Washington. 250,000 people gathered before the Lincoln Memorial. And on that stage stood faces America already recognized. James Baldwin, Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier, many of them had spent the previous 2 years moving quietly to Jackie Kennedy's White House. The image she had been building behind closed doors was now standing before the world. And then, in November, Dallas ended everything. On November 25th, 1963, a grieving widow planned one final image. For the honor guard carrying her husband's coffin, Jackie insisted black and white soldiers walk together. The United States had never staged a national funeral like that before. She was 34 years old. She had just watched her husband die in front of the world. And even then, she was still doing what she had always done, deciding who stood together. She never passed a law. She arranged rooms, ceremonies, and symbols. In a divided country, deciding who stood together was already political. 6 months later, the Civil Rights Act became law under Lyndon B. Johnson. The man who had delayed was gone. The law he had been pushed toward finally passed.
This Civil Rights Act is a challenge to all of us to go to work in our communities and our states, in our homes and in our hearts, to eliminate the last vestiges of injustice in our beloved country.
And the woman who never gave a speech had already spent 3 years rehearsing the image of the country America was trying to become. We are taught that power lives in speeches, elections, and laws. Much of it does, but some of it lives somewhere quieter, in invitations, in photographs, in sitting charts, in classrooms, in funerals, in deciding who belongs in the picture. Jacqueline Kennedy understood that kind of power better than almost anyone in Washington, despite never being elected to anything. Whether it came from conviction or strategy hardly matter anymore. The image was already out in the world. This was History of Script. If you want the stories behind the official version, you know where to find me.